Welcome to Mic Drop, the podcast where relevancy is irrelevant and we don't give a shit about your feelings. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He is a professional survival instructor, a best-selling author of multiple books on the subject of survival. He's a co-star of the hit Discovery show Dual Survival. He's an instructor, consultant, and trainer of all things survival running courses on such topics. When the shit hits the fan, MacGyver, Rambo, and Chuck Norris all call him to get bailed out. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Cody Lundin.
Hey, thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We were just talking off camera for a second about the fires in your area that are affecting us or affecting you guys there. Can you give us a quick update on what's going on with that? Yeah,
the update is if you have asthma, don't come to Prescott, Arizona right now.
Yeah.
The update is we're at about a little over 3,000 acres here. The Flagstaff one is 22,000 acres. I literally walked through ash falling to get to the podcasting studio here at Yavapai College. And it sucks because it's April. And so what that means is our fire season usually starts May, June. Those are the hottest months for us in this part of Arizona. So to have a kind of unprecedented two major fires start in April when it's still cool out, when it's still essentially early spring, doesn't bode well for us when it gets hotter as it's going to and drier, et cetera.
Yeah. Is it every couple of years it seems like you're plagued with fires of that magnitude, or is this kind of a once in a versus
No,
more?
it used to be every few years, but now it seems like every year.
Yeah.
One of my course areas burned, not entirely, but this is a course where we're covering 40, 50 miles of ground, and the fire scorched a lot of that area. So you can do the math on the number of acres. So it's becoming more pronounced. Things are becoming more dry in the Southwest. We have winds today of 40 to 50 mile per hour gusts, which is not helping our firefighters here.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably heard, and your listeners too, a few years ago, we lost 19 of our our firefighters, right? They died in the Yarnell fire. And it's just, what do you say? I mean, it's unfortunately, it's probably a sign of things to come.
Yeah, no, that's bad news. Well, I hope they get it under control and the wind dies down and you guys get back to some semblance of normal, but it sounds like it might be a little while.
Yeah, thanks.
What's the most non-minimalist guilty pleasure that would surprise people that you like to enjoy?
Non-minimalist. I love muscle cars. You like muscle cars?
It's funny you should mention that. I do. I like sports cars. I mean, I appreciate muscle cars. I'm more of a fan of the Euro exotics, but yeah, another show that I do uninfluenced is that's all we talk about is bikes and cars and everything. So.
Okay, can I shouldn't cuss on your show, right?
You should cuss on my show, actually.
Oh, okay. I don't know shit about cars, really. I'm not a mechanic. That's not my profession.
Me either.
And I appreciate what you like. I mean, there's something about, I think it's a Lamborghini Countach back in the day, or a Porsche, the Porsche turbos with the whale tail. Yeah. That's total art, right? But I also love vintage USA American muscle cars.
For sure.
Because the Barracuda, the Challenger, stuff like that. So most people don't know that about me.
That's interesting.
I'm not. I know I look kind of like a hippie, and I sort of am. But I'm also, I don't know any hippies that like muscle cars. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I'm right there with you. You're the first, I guess, if you would consider yourself a hippie. But for me, I like both. I appreciate the heritage that is behind American muscle, and because it's American, and just kind of the nostalgia that comes along with that time period in this country. Not that I was really around for it, but just understanding how it was then, it's hard not to like that. On the same token, from a pure driving experience standpoint, the newer, just meticulous and masterfully engineered machines that the Germans and Italians and English, for that matter, have made in the last decade are marvels, frankly. Not to say that some of the American cars right now aren't also, but they're definitely not on the same level. But To me, handling is really what separates a good car from a great car. That the steering and handling, speed and power is a must, and it's sexy and fun. But when you feel connected to the actual car itself on the road, and you feel like you're kind of working in sync, and the steering is almost on a telepathic nature, then that's when, to me, that's when you really experience it and really enjoy it. For me, at least. But
so, what I have to ask, do you Well, I won't say what do you have, but I mean, my dad was military, so I grew up partly in Germany when I was a kid because my dad was Air Force.
Oh, nice.
And so I understand Porsche, right? Because I was in that land. But what is your favorite?
I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite. I think all brands tend to hit and miss. Some maybe are more consistent than others, but they all have fumbles and touchdowns. To me, Ferrari makes a very well balanced car. I'm less of a fan of Lamborghini, with the exception of one or maybe two models. Porsche as a brand, I love. Engineering wise, they're great. For me, they're not as fun to drive because they're a little rougher and just a little more sterile, to the point where they're almost over engineered, where it almost kind of takes the playfulness and fun out of it. McLaren is kind of a weird mix, but they make really, really good cars, but to me, they're not as fun to drive. I'd say if I had to pick one, I think from the cars that I've driven, Ferrari has been the most fun to drive. I've rented a lot of different cars at tracks, and I've had, a number of different cars over the last years that have come and gone that I've tried out and what have you. But yeah, I guess if I had to pick one, I'd say it's that. But
I have never driven a Ferrari, so I'll have to take your word for it.
Yeah. Well, if you find yourself in Vegas, there's a place called Speed Vegas that you can rent just about whatever you want.
Oh, really?
And drive it on a track, which is pretty neat, So, you really get to experience. Like if you want to find out what you like, go spend a day or two there and try everything out. But what's your biggest oh shit moment when you were out in the elements, whether it was on camera or off?
My biggest oh shit moment was probably dealing with Discovery Channel executives. That was the most terrifying, horrifying experience of my entire life, and I wish I was kidding, but I'm not.
Yeah, it's that bad.
So the wilderness, even though it's unpredictable, it's not actively trying to hurt you or demean you or defame you or whatever. Human nature, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
I just read a little bit about you, and I really part of the reason I agreed to do this is what you do with the dogs.
Oh, I appreciate it.
I think that's really cool. Highly respectful. So I really, because I've had enough of the phony military bullshit. Yeah. With people on TV that have lied to get on TV, using phony stuff, phony military credentials to get on TV. I'm sick of it. Yeah. Well,
that's very prominent in your line of work, I imagine.
It is. Yeah. And it's probably prominent in your line of work.
Oh, yeah. I see it. I see phonies all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, that's the most terrifying thing. Wilderness can be a scary place, and of course, ignorance is not bliss, but it's not actively engaging for your demise. That's what human nature does, and you know that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Are there some times where it almost feels like human nature is coming after you? I know that there's been instances where, the interesting thing about the military is that the environment and the elements are an intangible, obviously out of our control, that can, of course, have enormous impacts on our operations and even cause them to be aborted or postponed or fail. And so from my experience, obviously very different from yours in that regard, but similarly is that, you're trying to accomplish a goal and Mother Nature is saying, yeah, maybe not this time. And so for us, I think a lot of times it feels like we're trying to do something and Mother Nature is just kicking you square in the nuts, every step along the way while you're trying to do it. Do you ever get that sense when you're out and about?
Yeah, but it's, and I understand that we have this as people, we have this misnomer of, and I'll say it, man versus wild, which is bullshit. Yeah. If you go way back to where your people's trained from, and I'll get to the point on this, is Dave Gansey is one of my main desert survival mentors. And Dave Gansey's in his 80s now. And he told me stories about the U.S. military. We're doing Vietnam, we're doing jungle training, and all of a sudden there's this threat in the Middle East. And so desert survival training got hot and heavy, according to him, in the 80s, when as in the military, were approaching him to do desert survival training. And originally they'd gone to the Bedouins, the U.S. military, and asked the Bedouin people, hey, we'd like you to train us how you survive in this environment. And they were like, well, what are you talking about? We don't survive here, we live here. Okay, that's an attitude shift. That's a mind shift that really is endemic with indigenous peoples, because when you grow up there, yeah, there's threats, but you know how it is.
Yeah.
I can imagine how you are in the military with the people that you've done stuff with out in the field. You have a whole different look at combat and being in the military than I have not 1 hour of military experience. I don't know shit about what you do. I'd love to know what you do, but I don't. So what I'm saying is, when a street person is comfortable on the street, they know where the homeless shelter is. They know where that gas station behind the alley that doesn't block off the water. An indigenous person, whether they're mountain, desert, or whatever, they're uncomfortable with they're comfortable with their environment. And so we have this thing in the USA, and it's perpetuated by phony nonsense on TV about there's this threat and it's always out to get you, right? It's out. And no, it's not. So Dave Gansey was one of my top mentors. Another one was Morris Kachansky, who recently died. He was in Alberta, Canada, and did a lot of stuff with Swedish military. And his thing was, the bush is neutral. It's neither for you nor against you. It just is. Yeah. And you better know what you're doing. So I like to take that approach to it in more ways than one. There's a lot of people that are survival instructors, and they preach the fear card, which I'm not going to do. That's a great way to try to make money, to scare the shit out of people, to get them to take your courses. But that's not how I want to operate. And as a survival instructor, as a professional, my goal is to try to mitigate people's risks in the backcountry. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming up in my head now of people I respect that were my mentors. They're my elders. And so I train with some of the best, and thank God that they got to me when I was young enough to be more or less of a blank slate. I'm sure you have your mentors and your people. And if you come to them unadulterated and you train from a master, that's a fucking lucky person, right?
Yeah,
because there's so much bullshit out there now that if you get bullshit, you know this, and I'm happy to be talking to someone, who's a professional. You understand your life is on the line based on the data you get from your people that trained you to whatever information you get to go on a mission. It's serious stuff. And I take my profession the same way. I'm dealing with people's safety. So yes, there's a bunch of threats in the wilderness, and there's a bunch of unknowns. And if you go back far enough in human culture, the reason the dark, as in nighttime, is the number one archival threat or scary thing for people is because it epitomizes the unknown. There's a lot of variables. So as an example, I first learned the word variable from Dave Gansey. And I would ask Dave Gansey, my desert survival mentor, because I'm pretty blunt and just give me the fucking information, man. Yeah. Don't sugarcoat it. And I'm like, Dave, what if blah, 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 blah happens? And he's like, Cody, maybe yes, maybe no. And they used to drive me crazy. Maybe yes, maybe no. You're a professional desert survival instructor. And then he brought up the word variables. And it took about 10 years for variables and maybe yes, maybe no to sink into my heart from my head and realize he's so good at what he does that he understands how vulnerable he is as a man, because he's seen stuff that a beginning survival instructor, they'll have black and white answers for. Someone who's new in my profession will have the answer, right? Yeah. Someone who's seasoned in my profession sometimes says, I don't know. And when you're dealing with human safety, the person that says, I don't know, is someone that you might want to put a little bit of trust in.
Yeah. I love that. I know on the dog training side, it's kind of similar that way, is that early on, there's like almost a happy medium of a shitty compromise, or kind of the worst of both worlds, is the just knowing just enough to be dangerous, to where
What do you mean by that? Are you meaning the dog sensing someone who's a beginner, or what do you mean by that?
No, so if I'm instructing, a novice dog owner on how to train their dog and how to work with their dog, et cetera, is that similarly, I'd say 95% of the time when I start an answer of any question, it starts out with, it depends.
Right.
Not this is how you do it and it's always this, whereas when people know just enough to be dangerous, it's very definitive. There's an ego vacuum there where it's, I have to feel like I have to exude confidence. I have to say, and assume, and have these people assume that I know exactly what I'm talking about and give them a very definitive answer. And a lot of times it's that same kind of thing. It's like, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not the right answer, because, dogs, just like with people, are not cookie cutter. Like, yeah, there are basic principles that apply to all dogs the same way there's basic principles that apply to all people, that apply to survival situations. But there's those variables and intangibles that really drive and dictate the nuance of what the right answer is or isn't, so.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what is not happening in my profession.
Yeah. Well, same
for
with mine.
A variety of different. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, there's dog trainers pop up every month that, that start their own business. And similarly, like, there's no governing body. And I'm not saying that that's the right answer necessarily. I don't know that would fix anything. I think it would create a bureaucracy and a good old boy network that wouldn't change anything and just would complicate shit. But the reality of it is, just like, I could start a survival company. Anybody can, say, hey, I'm Joe Bob, the dog trainer. And I have this business and I started an LLC and charge people for training. And some of it is dangerously terrible, similarly to your line of work. But hearing you talk, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, hearing you talk about, the difference between surviving and living, it reminds me of, we spent about almost 2 months in the Philippines on one of my deployments, and we were working with the Filipino version of SEALs. And similarly, we went through this jungle survival, evasion, and escape, or JEST. It's jungle environmental survival training. But it was about 10 days or so of out, living in the Filipino jungle with these guys, and it was exactly that. We were surviving, and I won't say barely, but it was difficult. Whereas these guys, it was no different than any of the other 355 days out of their year. They're diving into swamps and grabbing frogs and making bamboo shoot soup and trapping shit and climbing trees to get coconuts and different, levels of bamboo to build shit and whatever. And it was just like, Jesus Christ, like, these guys are at home. They're in their element. This is just another day to them. And we're sitting here, spilling fucking rice and tripping over hammocks and, fiddle fucking around trying to just not starve to death, and it was very humbling.
Yeah. And that's the difference between a local, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, similarly, if they came to Dallas, they would be a fish out of water and would have no fucking idea how to survive here either. But yeah, it was interesting, eye opening, and was good for perspective. No two ways about it. Was there an episode, or an environment? And I know, that's but a snapshot of your professional career, but just because that's something that I think anybody could actually watch, was there an episode from an environmental standpoint where the environment itself proved to be the most challenging, that kind of stands out as being the harshest or hardest to deal with? Sure.
In general, and this is well beyond this television show thing, and I know that you're into that, because
I watched it. I was a big fan of yours the whole time. When it first came out, I watched it as they aired. I loved that show.
Yeah, it's working for Discovery Channel was the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
That sounds like
caveat. Again, no exaggeration.
Yeah.
But let me answer that question, and I'm fine with the TV questions, as long as you're fine with brutal answers.
I mean, 100. I'd prefer nothing less.
Okay. This goes, well beyond the television show, but the main reason people die in an outdoor survival situation usually is lack of resources. If it's too cold outside and I don't have enough warmth, the person dies of lack of warmth, called hypothermia. The inverse is true. If it's too hot outside and I can't get enough cool in my core body temperature, hyperthermia takes the person out, etc. So one thing that dictates resources, as you know and I know, is water. So any sort of desert region requires a high apex of skill because you don't have the Filipino jungle, right? They're diving into swamps and getting frogs and climbing coconut trees. That doesn't happen out here, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So Chile, the Atacama Desert, to specifically answer your question, where I guess NASA did the Mars rover, right? It's like there's these calcite crystals. I saw one bug during that shoot, like this, like lonely bug. It had wings. It was fun. What the hell is this? Picture a place with no bugs, no plants, these weird calcite crystals. Remember Star Trek?
Yeah.
There's that, Captain Kirk there's that one, there's gorilla creatures that are coming after Captain Kirk on this deserted land. It looked like a set out of a Star Trek episode. There was nothing growing. And not only that, the ground had a sodium capacity to it. It was salt on the ground. There's the Atacama Desert in Chile, which there's oases out there, but in general, because I want to keep it general until you choose a rabbit hole to go down, resources, lack of resources are what kills people. And any desert region with lack of resources inherently based in the bioregion automatically requires a higher apex of skill to deal with that region. So, again, just add resources. And then we've got the frogs and the plants and all the stuff that those Philippine seals, or the equivalent of, as you said, they make it seem easy.
Yeah.
So again, water is really key, and we're seeing an absence of that here in the Southwest, like we kind of initiated with the fire talk, earlier, in this podcast, and it's a big concern.
Yeah.
And it's water is life, man.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, if where are you from then? Texas is where you're at?
I'm in the Dallas area. I'm originally from Iowa, which, it's plenty humid and tons of rainfall there too.
Okay,
so,
but not where you are right now, right?
It's actually, in Dallas. I'm in Dallas. So
is it arid? I don't know
No.
nothing about Dallas. Would
No.
you consider it arid or not?
No, it's very humid here. I mean, we're only an hour and a half, 2 hours from the Louisiana border. So it's very humid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
now, if you go 3 or 4 hours west of here, once you start getting into West Texas, then it's like New Mexico and Arizona, and it's all.
So that's the Chihuahuan Desert that I know Texas has.
Yeah.
Got it. So that would be similar to us. So that's my long-winded way of saying the most challenging environments are the ones with the least amount of resources, and the resources are usually dictated by water.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense, and I know I've run into that. When I first was at SEAL Team 3, this was before a reorganization, kind of military, or not military wide, but Navy wide, where they kind of went away from subject matter experts or areas of expertise within each SEAL team, kind of having its own thing that they were good at. SEAL Team 3 was the CENTCOM, or Central Command Desert Warfare Specialist kind of team. So the first few years I was at SEAL Team 3, that was our thing. And so we did a lot of, long range reconnaissance stuff in the Mojave Desert and, by Fort Irwin and around Vegas and, some places that in July, August are pretty difficult places to be. But, I can certainly appreciate that, no doubt. And I know another thing I'm curious of is in terms of the instruction that you give, to a certain extent, I think it is driven off of confidence and in some ways can't be taught. But I know in the military, there's a huge component of not panicking that plays such an enormous role. I mean, especially when you're in the water, we're a maritime special operations group and we do a lot of things, underneath the water on closed circuit breathing devices and open circuit. But panicking underwater is a very quick way to get yourself killed. But even in a survival environment, I know, the survival training that I have been a part of is that was a key concept, was being able to maintain a sense of calmness and not wasting energy and not panicking, because you tend to make emotionally based shitty decisions when you're in that train of thought. And so I'm curious, is that something that you typically cover in some of your survival courses?
I do. I mean, in my opinion, survival's 90% psychology, because it doesn't matter what you have buried in your backyard if you're too scared, stupid to use it.
Yeah.
Whether I don't, Here's what I think a survival instructor should have. The 3 Ps, I call it: psychology, physiology, and physics. So psychology is what you're talking about, which obviously dictates human physiology. And then we have the physics, primarily heat loss and gain. So we're dealing with conduction, convection, radiation, evaporation, respiration, the 5 main ways that a human body loses or gains heat: hypothermia, dehydration, blah, blah, blah. So what you just said is key to staying alive, but I don't like drone and lecture on about that. I do in my books, in a sense, but I try to dovetail in human physiology, human psychology, and the physics of heat loss and gain in almost everything I do. And what I mean by that is I teach modern outdoor survival skills. What happens if the Jeep breaks down and it starts to lightly snow? I teach primitive living skills, catching fish with your hands, making fire with sticks, blah, blah, blah. And I teach urban preparedness with or without zombies. And I just taught a college course a couple weeks ago at Yavapai College on primitive skills. And we were going to the museum. I had them study their culture of origin, so they're not trying to play Indian. I have a Scandinavian background, so my Viking people look like this, and we're probably killing your people, 1,000 years ago, because we tended to do that. And it was all primitive skills based, making fire with sticks, literally, etc. And then I just gave a lecture for the Akosa Institute at Prescott College. They do have a sustainable design program there, and they wanted me to lecture on urban preparedness based on my homestead, and a grid down scenario based on my second book, When All Hell Breaks Loose. And so there's those 3 main things: modern outdoor survival skills, primitive living skills, and urban preparedness. I'm trying to think of a SEAL metaphor. One's a shotgun, one's this 50 cal sniper rifle, and the other's Colt 1911. Whatever. Yeah. They're all guns, but more than most people, they have specific applications for specific things. Yeah. And so what happens in survival training, I know I'm going off the deep end here, but people confuse those with BS TV shows and whatnot. And context is everything in my world, or people die. Context is everything in your world, or people die. And context defines all content. So just in the last couple of weeks, we went from making fire with sticks to talking about passive solar design, etc. So I don't know if that answered the question, because I got off track. But,
absolutely it did, and I appreciate the rabbit hole that you went down, because as you said, context is everything, and I think that provides additional context. So I do appreciate it. As far as that mentality goes, from my experience, that's one of those things that's kind of hard to teach. I think some people inherently are better at, maintaining a sense of level-headedness and calmness. Some of it comes with confidence. A lot of it comes with confidence. And the more situations you've been through, the more confident and calm you can be. But I still think that there is almost a genetic component to people being calm under pressure to a certain extent. But
that's a good question, and my main answer is I don't know. Yeah. I know I've read a few books way in the past. I couldn't remember the names, and I do think that some people chill easier than other people. Yeah. But as you know, while I'm not doing this rote lecture on the psychological survival per se, it's inherent in everything we're doing when we train. Yeah. And as you know, training and repetition helps deal with a lot of those boogeymen of the mind stuff that creeps in when people get freaked out. Absolutely. There's the stop thing. It's in the survival books, stop, think, observe, plan. I've added the letter A in my book, act, and that might be hugging a tree if you're a kid or whatever, to actively walking yourself out of a situation. But one thing as a teacher, and I know you're one too, you can bore the shit out of people with what they need. But if you don't present the information in a way where they'll retain it, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So psychological survival really trips my trigger. It's very fascinating to me, but it can be boring as shit to most people.
Yeah.
So in my books, I'm engaging with, R. Crumb. I don't know if you're familiar with that illustrator, did a lot of the crazy 1960s comics and whatnot. We chose in my books to have different characters representing different qualities sketched out in a way that was funky, like you're not going to see in any other survival book. The reason I did that, even though I did do a lot of acid when I was a kid, the reason I did that is because way before the written language, there was imagery. Before the written language. And what retains in a person's psyche under stress, which is what we're talking about, essentially panic, fear, low-level anxiety, etc., are images. It's not the paragraph I'm writing on how to start the fire. It's looking at the illustration of that hippie dude making the fire that's going to stick in someone's psyche. That's been proven for decades.
Yeah.
So I'm big into imagery. I'm big into gross motor skills, stuff that works under stress. As I talk to the SEAL, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
I don't want fine and complex motor skill stuff in my clients if I can help it, because as you know, in combat or military training, fine and complex motor skills go to hell under real stress pressure when someone's shooting at you. So that gross motor skill stuff is what we're left with. So it's important to assess how people learn, how they digest information, and more importantly, to your point, how they retain that information in an emergency scenario. And it's not traditional teaching. It has to be different. It has to be visual. It has to be impactful. It has to, sometimes I'll say fuck or I'll say shit, not necessarily when kids are my clients, but when I see people kind of, the glare, because I have to do some lecture and demonstration before we do the physical skill, so the context is spot on. And when people maybe fade, because we're outdoors. Yeah. Here at the college I'm in the classroom 2 days and out in the bush for 2 days. But normally all my courses are out in the wilderness. It's hot. People are getting bit by bugs. It's hard to pay attention. And I might throw in profanity simply to go, oh, and you can see it, right? And your students like, okay, now they're paying attention again.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with my client's safety. That's 100% important to me. That's a priority. I will not negate that. That's a sacred honor to have someone put their fucking life in your hands as a survival instructor. So I give my people 110%. And with that is how I teach them to try to help them retain that information under stress, period.
Yeah. To me, it's fascinating. And I love the parallels that, really throughout life in general. I think, everything is that way, whether it's, shooting and military operations, survival stuff, jujitsu, being a chef, you name it. All of those principles apply, and how people learn. And to me, that's something I run into very, very often, in my industry is exactly what you said, is there's some brilliant, masterful trainers out there that are almost too good, or they're so advanced that they're talking so far over the head of the people that they're teaching that they're actually not very good at instructing, because it's just too complicated, and that's one thing that I've tried to focus on very specifically in my online training, is to just keep it really simple. And I know, if I think back to the time in the military, that when you first start out, we'll take room clearing as an example, because it's one of the more common things that a lot of people can at least, imagine or have that vision in their head of a SWAT team moving through a target, et cetera, is that, the basics, like when you first start out, you're not doing, a train of 16 dudes flooding a house with 9 rooms and a long hallway and crash bangs going off and shit like that. You start out with one basic, 12 by 12 room, 2 guys, one going one way, one going the other way, doing very, very basic movements. And you practice that. And one of the terms we use in the dog industry is a conditioned response. Some people would say muscle memory, what have you. But, my kind of principal phrase, I would say, is that a dog is trained when it stops being a decision and becomes a reaction. And that's the key. And especially with a dog, because you can't explain anything to them. They don't think in a language. Everything is A plus B equals C, and it's a simple association. But it's largely that same way with people, and where, if you do something so many times to where you stop having to think about it, then that's where your money is made. And a lot of times it's hard to teach people that when you're talking so far over their head that they're just lost and they're checking their phone and they're worrying about lunch and everything else.
Right.
But, this is the longest lightning round that I've had with any guest. The last question.
What does that mean, lightning round?
So usually after the intro, I like to just throw a couple of kind of not curveball, but just lighter hearted questions to get the juices flowing. And the last question I ask in that lightning round is, what is your morning routine on a normal day where you're not traveling? Normally the lightning round takes 5, maybe 7 minutes, and here we are a solid half hour and change into it. But
is that bad?
That's fantastic. I mean, to me,
okay.
I'd always rather have too much to talk about than not enough. So,
my morning routine, I get up early. I'm an early bird. I like protein. I'll eat 6 egg whites, 2 yolks. I'll have some not the flaked oats, but it's what is it called? The crushed oats or something like they're not the flakes. I'll have oatmeal, right, with a few raisins. And I'll train, and I like free weights, and then I'll start my day, right? That's like breathing to me, training. Mm-hmm. I train. Originally, I started. This is probably you didn't ask this question, but what the hell? I got busted for selling drugs when I was a teenager, a long time ago, and I originally started training in jail because I was going to fuck up the person that put me in jail, right? Yeah. That was my MO. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm a peaceful person now. But looking at 30 years in prison when you're 18 years old it sucks, right? Yeah. And of course, now I just continue to train because we talked a little bit about human physiology. And there's a lot of survival instructors that don't have any first aid training. Would you go to a car mechanic that didn't understand how an engine works? Yeah. I mean, all survival training is based on human physiology. So if you don't know human physiology to a certain extent, you shouldn't be teaching outdoor survival skills. So that coupled with wanting to stay in shape, because I'm doing these aggressive field courses and I'm having to go above and beyond with my clients, that's how I start my morning 5 days a week. And then I admit I'm a workaholic, but I love what I do. And everything is, if it's not my self-reliant homestead, it's right now I'm working on a new clubhouse for my school, and I think it's important to just learn how to do stuff that men used to do. Yeah. Granted, I'm not going to fix a car, but my friends that are great builders, I love to learn. So I like to learn about building with them, little things about, it seems the male species are,
it's a dying breed.
Yeah. We used to be, my grandpa was a man.
Yeah.
He needs to, do stuff, and baled hay until he was 84 years old on his tractor, until he rolled his tractor on top of his body and thought he probably ought to retire. Yeah. Probably, Grandpa. Yeah. But that stock, if I'm a survival instructor and you train dogs and you're a SEAL, so we're kind of a different breed, but I'm really passionate about self-reliance, big time. I'm passionate about freedom. And what I've seen in people, myself and in clients and students, hundreds of them, last year was my 30th year anniversary from my Aboriginal Living Skills School. So I've been doing this a long time, is when you can share something with someone that boosts their self-confidence and makes them feel freer, you've done a good thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I do. And so I'm really interested in remedial skills, building or whatever. And because I have such a hands-on lifestyle, I'm at the office, so I tap on a keyboard every once in a while, but I'm also like doing weird stuff that men used to do on a homestead, planting, cutting stuff down. How do I, here's the chainsaw, better tighten the chain, blah, blah, you know what I mean? Yeah. And someone who lives in more of an urban environment, that's already a foreign thing. I live in rural environments. Yeah. So I'm having to engage more with nature. And of course, my profession is that too. So as soon as I'm done with my morning training, I go on with whatever needs are of the day. And I'm really grateful to be alive.
Yeah, no, I love it. As far as the morning transitioning into, whatever needs to be done, are most days spent outside of your home or are you working on stuff from there?
It depends. Like right now, I'm rehabbing a 100-year-old building to be my new clubhouse. And we're talking, I killed 5 mice last week. I'm setting traps on the roof. I got trap lines in cars. I got trap lines. I live in rodent infested areas, right? Because they're rural areas. So we're doing roofing and trapping rodents to get them out of there. Tomorrow we'll put in a new old antique door, and just so a lot of it's outside. But in this case, my focus for the last few months has been on rehabbing this old structure. And I don't really know anything about building, but I knew friends that are really good. Yeah. Like this one 75-year-old guy that helps me. He's a man, right? He grew up in that era when they were back east and they had a sled in the wintertime and they tapped sugar maples. I had no idea about all these stories telling me, yeah, we had this sled, we tapped sugar maples. They had their own sugar house and they boiled it and make maple syrup, and they were hands-on with the land. So someone like that also knows electricity and plumbing and building, man, I want to learn from them.
Yeah,
I like to find people that are really good at their craft, and I love to learn from a master.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's fantastic, and it's rare these days that people are that way. It's kind of the Amazon Prime right click. I want it right fucking now, and I know. And I mean, we're all guilty of it to a certain extent, but you can see the degradation of our society as it relates to the male species that way, where it's just becoming fewer and more far between where you run into guys that you would say, yeah, like that's a fucking man right there.
Yeah. Which is a degradation of skill set.
Yeah.
And with that degradation of skill set comes a dependence on stuff that we shouldn't be dependent on. You can call it technology. You can call it whatever you want. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories, or I've had decades full of conspiracy theories, right? I've gotten all the catalogs in the mail over the years, well before this bullshit that's going on now about whatever. But skill set. Two, I don't, and you haven't asked me any, and I'll be clear with you if you do. These boilerplate questions, Cody, what's your favorite knife? Well, hey, what's your favorite gun?
Yeah,
and the first thing you would say is, what am I doing? What's the context, right? There's no context to the question. But I'm finding, the more I learn about skills, hands-on skills, and being more self-reliant, it feels really good. And two of the most hardcore skills that someone could have cross-culturally, desert survival, mountain survival, or a cutting edge in fire. And notice I didn't say knife. I said cutting edge. Yeah. It could be a can lid, piece of broken bottle glass. It could be a piece of a flake from a jasper cobble or whatever it is. Cutting edge and fire are being screwed now. I was given a lecture at REI, like 22 years ago or so. And it's lecture. It was in the shop. And this old guy raises his hand and said, well, Cody, back when I was a kid in school, we were required to take a knife to recess. And I'm like, holy shit, And of course I asked him why. Guess why this guy was required to take a knife to recess when he was in school? Do you have any guesses?
The only thing I can think of is maybe it was in a super rural environment where there was natural predators nearby, or it was in an environment where they got hung up on something and need to cut shit loose. I don't know. That's the only thing.
Well, what he told me was we were required and expected as young boys to whittle. We were expected to learn that skill of whittling, how to wield a sharp piece of metal in our hand and not cut our finger off, because that was a part of daily society.
Yeah.
So what happens when a kid takes a knife to school now? Oh my God. Yeah. And I'm not advocating kids take knife to school. What I'm advocating is the lack of content and context in the USA of an archival skill like knowing how to wield a cutting edge, which is foundational. As a SEAL, I imagine what's foundational to your world would have been a firearm in many different attributes. What's foundational in my world is learning how to wield a knife, knife safety, stuff like that. And the other aspect is fire. So what I mean by fire, people don't know. The forest is burning. I just told you I walked through white ash to get to this pod. It's dropping on my vehicle, the white ash. My prediction, and they haven't found out what happened with this fire yet, Crooks Canyon fire, I think. It was Easter weekend. So my bet is some camper made a campfire on Easter weekend and didn't put it out.
Yeah.
That's my prediction. So fast forward back into what we're talking about. We don't know how to use fire anymore as a culture.
Yeah.
And someone screwed up big time. probably with both of these fires now in Arizona, because we're pre-monsoonal. We don't have lightning yet. That rocks and rolls in July, where the lightning will start fires potentially because of our monsoon season. So you have fire. People don't know how to use it. If you had a grid down scenario where Russia just yesterday, told Poland and some other country, screw you, we're not giving you any more energy. So energy is being used as a weapon, always has been for decades, right? There's a reason we fight some of these wars. So if the propane's gone, the gas is gone, etc., what it ends up down to is someone with a book of matches busting up their kitchen table to cook the canned beans in the backyard.
Yeah.
Look at Ukraine right now. And that's essentially, they're covering the content of my urban preparedness course right now. They're cooking over the open fire, trying not to get killed, getting out of the basement. The other aspect, because you must have listeners that give a shit about hopefully what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, they all do.
With fire, the lack of knowing how to make fire is the danger of fire burning things down. So we have the urban preparedness situation where your idiot neighbor burns their house down, and because of lack of emergency response, because it's an emergency situation, so they're all tied up, you burn down entire neighborhoods. And the other aspect of fire is right now, today, sitting here talking to you, the most common form of poison in the United States of America is carbon monoxide. So people don't understand fire, how it works, let alone how to make it, let alone with sticks, if you wanted to get that exotic. They don't understand about carbon monoxide, which right now, in a non-grid down situation, is the most common form of poisoning right now, believe it or not, is carbon monoxide. So my unfortunate prediction, if we're talking urban preparedness, and this is all brought about by the lack of a skill set that we used to have in this country to be self-reliant. People knew how to deal with knives. They knew how to deal with fire. That was part of our history. It's literally part of our history. And right now, those two things are dangerous weapons. They're dangerous weapons in the eyes of the law, and they're dangerous weapons in the hands of a neophyte who doesn't know what in the hell they're doing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, if you look at every survival kit out there, and I agree with having a cutting edge in fire in survival kits, but if the user does not know how to use the cutting edge in fire, then you might as well give Cody a gun. He doesn't understand which way the bullet comes out, right? So a loss of skill set is a loss of self-reliance, which is a loss of freedom, which is a loss of confidence, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I would throw guns into that same category. Years ago, there was weapons safety in high schools.
Yeah.
In most high schools. And now, it's the exact opposite of that. And similarly, a lot of why it's so divisive legislation wise is just a lack of understanding. It's being scared of something that you don't understand, and thinking that this is inherently dangerous, even though it's an inanimate object. And it ultimately boils down to the end user. I mean, 50 years ago, you could order shotguns through the mail, through a Sears catalog, and have it delivered. Yeah. I mean, like guns are the least available they've ever been in the history of this country right now. And they're causing more problems from a nefarious standpoint now than they ever were when they were a lot easier to get. It's just, so yeah, I mean, it's a strange dichotomy that way, but
it is.
I would like to, divert a little bit just to kind of your background in terms of where you grew up and just kind of what your childhood was like in terms of how it led to you getting into what you did. I read your bio on the website, but just for the listener, if you could kind of synopsize that.
Sure. Yeah. I was born a military brat, an Air Force brat. So we moved a lot because my dad was being kicked around. My dad was a pilot in Vietnam. And so I grew up kind of because we kept moving and leaving my friends, which was a big buzzkill for me. I got way into nature, and my dad was into nature too. So was my mom. I remember going to the Boundary Waters when we lived in Minnesota when I was a kid and drinking right out of the lakes, portaging with the canoes, catching northern pike, blah, blah, blah. So because I'm an only child, people tell me that explains a lot about me. But, I was in constantly moving. I spent a lot of time outdoors. So I don't have a fancy story. I wasn't raised by two wolves. I have a fairly normal upbringing and a decent upbringing. But what I think I've always been interested in doing more with less. And I've always been interested in how'd they do that? How did these people live out in the backcountry? And I was fairly rural. I went to high school in Wyoming. And we were on acid and mushrooms and drunk off our ass, but we were doing it in the woods, So I have a lot of backcountry time just because some of the rural environments I grew up in, which were pivotal times in a kid's life, junior high, high school, where, in my high school in Wyoming during hunting season, I didn't hunt as a kid. I was kind of like an oddball because everyone else did. And like half the high school guys were gone because they were out hunting. So even though I can have some liberal biases, I have a lot of conservative biases too. I grew up around ranchers. I grew up around cowboys. I grew up around stoned hippies. I grew up around a lot of different people.
Did you play any sports?
I think that it's an art to, as you know, leadership is a big part of what I do. Mm-hmm. Anyone in an instructor, whatever the profession is, that's a leadership role. And you can make or break a student. Yeah. And so what I try to do in my courses is make people stronger, make people better, make people freer. And so I'm really into that. And I'm regaling back to that again. But I don't have a really fancy upbringing, man.
Did you play any sports growing up?
Nature and wanting to have more nature.
Yeah. Did you play any sports growing up?
I did. I couldn't play the football, and I was a stoner in high school. So all the stoners played soccer. Yeah. So I loved to play soccer because we had an African, like literally from like South Africa. He was going to the university there. And he would have a pony keg in his shitty Toro. He had like a Toro commercial old van, like for Toro mowers. Yeah. And he was like, he would take me out and they would slaughter a goat because that's traditionally in the African village what they did. And so I played soccer because the losers could play soccer, and I played hockey because the losers could play hockey. And that was about it.
That's a trip. Was there a kind of a light switch moment for you where you said, this is what I want to do from a survival instruction standpoint, or was it gradual?
There was a light switch moment at one point. And when I spent several months in jail for selling acid, which I kind of mentioned, they were going to send me to the state mental institution for treatment in Wyoming. Yeah. And my parents said, no, you're not sending our only son to the nut house for treatment. And I got some really crazy stories because I was in jail long enough to have people come and go about people smearing feces on the wall. And that doesn't sound like a good treatment place. Yeah. So they sent me to a drug rehab in Arizona before I was living here. And we had this dude that used to take us on day hikes, take all the drug addicts out in the woods, right? And keep in mind, I've been in an orange jumpsuit in a cell for several months. And I went out to this place in Sedona, Arizona called Boynton Canyon, which if you haven't Googled it, you should, because it's gorgeous. And it blew my mind. It was all nature all at once. And I don't know if I started crying or whatever, but I'd just gone through a lot of bullshit being in jail for a long time with the legal system, still looking at 3 to 8 years in prison if I didn't pee in a cup and the cup was the right color, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And when he took me on this day hike into this beautiful wilderness area, I remember the impact that had on me. And that's when I decided I want to share this and how it makes me feel with other people. I didn't know it was survival skills at the time, but I knew it was nature-based.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, and so from that point, did you seek out instruction and try to get into it kind of full time that way, or where did you go from there?
Yeah, I took my first course with Boulder Outdoor Survival School a long time ago, and then I ended up teaching for them. And then there's a gatherings we go to, primitive skills gatherings, and I met a guy named Morris Kachansky, who I mentioned before, and immediately flew to Alberta, Canada to prostrate myself at his feet as the boreal survival master. And this is before a lot of people knew about Morris. He'd done stuff with Swedish military and blah, blah, blah. But, the reason why everyone wears their knife around their neck, including me, is because of Morris.
Yeah.
The reason people are into Mora knives, Mora is a town in Sweden, we could talk about knives later, is because of Morris. He introduced that to most of North America. And of course, by default, I introduced that on a TV show to a lot of other people as well. And I was dirtbag broke. He agreed to train with me. This is a master. Picture a Zen master. I'm coming up. He picked me up from the airport. And as payment, I gave him a bundle of seep willow, which is a certain stick here that makes fire really well. God knows how I got it into Canada. That wouldn't happen today. And I brought a case of tuna fish. So I gave him a case of tuna fish, a bundle of seep willow, and I think some yucca alata for fireboards for a hand drill for a month of his time, where I lived on site in a trailer in his backyard because he has an acreage. And he accepted that bullshit payment with grace. Yeah. And it was like, oh, Cody, I see. How do you use the seep willow and yucca? And I showed him and go, oh, I see you gave me a lifetime supply of hand drill material. It's like, yeah, I did. And I trained with him for, I think, 3 weeks, and it was life-changing for me. Yeah. Like you probably have with your mentors. I got to train with the master when I was super green and just starting out. And his integrity, his integrity with skills, his integrity with training, his no bullshit attitude. He wasn't a dick. He was very gentle, very patient. Means a lot to me. And when I look back on that time I spent with him, and I could say the same for Dave Gansey, my desert survival mentor, and other people, it's foundationally why I am who I am. And it's foundationally why I have zero fucking tolerance for phony survival experts on TV or whatever, and the people that promote them and make lots of money promoting them. Yeah. It's dangerous. It's gotten people killed. And I didn't learn that from my mentors that way. You have to have integrity when you're dealing with people's lives, or you should get the fuck out of the kitchen. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I mean, the passion that you exude in talking about that, I think speaks volumes to, to your integrity and how serious you take it, which you should. I mean, I agree. Like, there's a lot of bullshit out there that, that ends up getting people killed or hurt.
Do you get that? You know what I think? I don't know if you could make a whole podcast out of it, but I'll just say it like it is. Discovery Channel didn't know anything about properly vetting someone of your caliber. Yeah. They didn't know. How do I know? Google my co-hosts and you'll find out how I know. Yeah. But what would be interesting to me, because I don't know anything about your world, is if you were to train a television executive how to properly vet someone who's been in the U.S. military, what would you tell them?
To me, the tough part is just that, is training somebody to vet that. I think no different than, I guess I could throw the same question. How would you teach somebody that doesn't know anything about it to vet somebody? To me, like the key to being able to vet somebody is you knowing it. So I can't teach somebody to call a SEAL bullshit or not. Like, I'll know it that fucking quick, and any guys who are legit operators are going to spot, like, you'll know the dude that walks in the room, like, yeah, that's the fucking guy, or that's not the guy, without even fucking talking to him, and so I can't teach that to an executive, and so to me, instead of them teaching that, is hire somebody who is legit and have them do the vetting. To me, is the secret sauce for that. But
okay, I thought you'd say that, but I just had to ask a dumb question.
But yeah, I mean, so I see it all the time. I mean, you see the same thing again, and I probably in every industry. I mean, take all those fucking chef shows that are popular. Some similarly, I think there's a bunch of fucking know-nothing has-beens on those. There's, dog training shows where, people with good personalities and that know the right people, get into spots. I mean, we'll take Cesar Millan. I mean, I don't think he's a complete fucking idiot, but is he the best trainer I've seen? No, and not even close. but his story, his brand, and everything else makes for an entertaining show. Like, I'm not here to say anything negative about the guy, but what I will say is there are, a shitload of people that I know that are far, far better suited, for a program like that than he is. And I'm not putting myself in that category, but yeah, I mean, I think it's, the shitty part with TV and reality TV is exactly that, and you can take the music industry as the same thing, is that, the people that end up being famous are the people that the assholes in charge want to be famous, and want to be in those positions. I mean, how many, little hole in the wall bars in fucking Nashville or San Diego or anywhere do you see somebody on open mic night that is one of the most talented musicians I've ever seen in my life, that I've never heard of and never seen again after that? But then you have, Britney Spears and other people that, can barely not get booed off the stage on karaoke night. And they're, fucking billionaires from the establishment putting them in the right position and packaging it just right and whatever. So, I think that's pretty consistent across just about every industry, which is frustrating. But what was the path like from when that life-changing 3-week moment to where ultimately, and I don't want to focus all on the show, but because again, it's something that people can actually watch as a representation. How did that happen? And by all means, shit talk all you want or expose whatever you want on Discovery as far as how that show goes. But I know a lot of people are curious about, if certain experiences are staged or not, or how realistic it is, or just kind of how the whole thing fucking works, frankly.
Well, TV is all produced, right? Because that's why they made television producers. And in my contract, if I said certain things, I'm liable for $5 million.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how I'll preface this conversation. So, TV is TV. I think that if you're a real doctor, but you're playing the part of a physician on TV, then that's cool. Because what we just talked about is, it takes one to know one, right? Yeah. If you really want to vet a SEAL, you should have a SEAL do the vetting. Yeah. If you want to vet an outdoor survival instructor, likewise. How that usually works, and I've done a lot of television well before dual survival, a lot, back into the 90s. Not like network, but like here's how it's devolved, and I'm using that word on purpose. Back in the day, survival stuff on TV used to be a news crew. Usually there was an incident. Sometime it was just a storyline, like Dateline NBC had me on a couple times, and one was a lost hiker scenario. I don't remember if there was a backstory, and then one was a winter survival segment. Typically it was, CBS, NBC, whatever. Some of this was pre-cable. They would want an informational segment on how to survive X, Y, and Z, right? So you'd take the newscaster out, you'd make a big X on the ground with newspaper, the Sky News chopper would come down and you'd signal for rescue. And I'm literally talking to you about something that I've done in the desert. And it was informative. It was not meant to be a flashbang. It was not meant to be sensationalized. It was like, hey, it's getting hot in Arizona. We got Cody Lundin here to show us how to stay alive in the desert, Since then, it's devolved into a bunch of phony survival experts on TV based on ratings and, of course, money, the king of all things. And I've literally been around long enough where I've watched this de-evolution of survival skills on TV. And it got more personality-centric. You can say what you want about Steve Irwin. I'm not necessarily a fan. But, I was a fan of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, where back in the day, the star of the show was nature. It was wildlife. And that dude that Marlon Perkins would throw out there, whatever his name was, run and check that, go and hug that Cape buffalo. There was that dude, because Marlon was old, right? But it was always focused on the wildlife. Yeah. Along comes Steve Irwin, and it's focused on him. The wildlife is kind of a sidekick. That's what's happened with survival training. It's no longer a skills-based, we want to know. It's a purely entertainment-based thing where, just like you said, we're engaging with someone who might not know shit, but they're an interesting personality that makes us a lot of money for our corporate members or whatever it is.
Yeah.
The reason why that's disgusting and disappointing is because, unlike cake making, where I made a crappy chocolate cake, who cares? This programming can kill people.
Yeah.
What happens with TV, I think it's theta waves. This is all not my idea. This has been proven. TV is hypnotic, literally, the radiation it puts off. I've already talked to you about the power of imagery. Imagery rules. Imagery comes up into someone's memory in crisis situations when the written word is long forgotten. So picture this. Dozens of phony survival instructors on a hypnotic medium with imagery and sexy stuff that people are sitting here watching, and they're absorbing those bullshit skills, whether they want to absorb them or not. So what comes out in an emergency scenario, real time in the backcountry, is potentially those bullshit skills. Yeah. That's how dangerous this really is. People don't, I know I'm going down a rabbit hole, but it's a rabbit hole where I live, right? Yeah. Because I'm a survival instructor. So that's how it's devolved in a bird's eye view about content and context. Now, speaking of content, what you typically have, and I get them once a week, once a month, and for many years, I'll get the email from the casting whatever. Hey, we're putting, usually it's a major cable network is having a new survival show, and X, Y, and Z. Do you want to send a reel? Do you want to send a casting tape or whatever? And they'll look for you being the person that has the most crap on the wall online, not the person in a little hole in the wall bar who's the best musician you've ever heard that you'll never hear from again. It's the person who's the whore that's out there wanting to be on TV. That's a whole nother dangerous thing. Yeah. People that are desperate to be on TV lie. So then we've got this credibility problem right off the bat, and a problem with who this person functionally is as a potential sociopath. Yeah. So they'll email you, they'll like you by basically what you send them, and then X, Y, and Z scenario happens. Now, for dual survival, I was never asked for a professional resume. Really? And yet they were marketing me to the world as a world-class survival expert, whatever that is. Now, by some strange coincidence or chance, Discovery Channel actually did hire a professional survival instructor, probably by mistake, because that's not what they're usually doing. There was never any vetting of me professionally. There was vetting of me to make sure I wasn't a violent criminal psychopath, so they wouldn't get busted later, right, by hiring a violent criminal psychopath. Yeah. But you would think, because how they originally pitched me, they got busted with Man vs. Wild. They got busted with Mr. Grills, right, who's not a survival instructor at all. He plays one on TV. They got popped. Discovery Channel got busted. So they wanted a show with credibility. Literally, I have the emails, credibility and competence. So I thought that they would do some professional vetting because they were already behind the eight ball on their lack of credibility in their survival programming. And I was wrong. Yeah. I was wrong. And they didn't vet. And the fallout from that is an easy Google search to see the train wreck that show became through lack of leadership and mismanagement, which all could be ideally dealt with proper vetting of the people on the show, right? Yeah. If you want credibility, ask for a professional resume. You remember that? It was on a piece of paper. Now it's all online. And maybe if you're really racy, you actually had points of contact who could back up your bullshit, because we all know that resumes are some padded BS. Yeah. None of that ever happened. And so, I thought that strange at the time, but now I see it for what it was.
No, for sure. I think where it's tricky is back to one of the points you made earlier about making information or teaching / instructing, presenting it, however you want to coin it, in a manner with which people are engaged and interested enough to retain it. And I think that's where the slippery slope is that if the subject matter experts that are legitimately, the best at what they do, but are so fucking boring that nobody wants to watch or pay attention, then it doesn't matter. The shitty part is that they've overcorrected to a point where all they're thinking about is who's the most entertaining, who's got the biggest social media following, who's the flashiest, sexiest example of somebody we can bring on the show. And that's who gets the vote. I am curious in thinking and hearing you kind of talk about the progression of how it used to be versus what it's turned into. I can't help but think that the show Survivor probably played a huge role in the degradation of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, that show's not about survival skills at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about who can piss the fewest people off. And I mean, it's a popularity contest, really, because if you're too good, you're too big of a threat.
Ironically, our cameramen worked on that show too. They filmed many seasons of Survivor, and there was some interesting stories behind the scenes. Well beyond that, I think it was in 2000. Survivor is an incredibly successful, monetarily successful, if that's what you term success as. Yeah. It's a blasphemy as far as we're teaching people to screw other people for money. Yeah. It's Lord of the Flies. It's the way your tribe gets killed. Can you imagine if a SEAL team were trying to fuck each other over on a mission? You'd all be dead.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a social experiment.
You stand behind your people. Yeah. And that's not what the show is about. But years ago, I think in 2000, Playboy magazine interviewed me about this new show called Survivor, And at that time, what I got told by the reporter that was interviewing me was they tried to do it more realistic, but people on the show quickly realized that if they just sat under the coconut tree and didn't do anything, they would conserve calories and try to last the longest. Right?
Yeah.
So they had to initiate these BS games they do now, one, to engage and make money, but also because people instinctually knew, I don't want to move my body because I need the calories I have. Yeah. But the tubes of sunscreen, the buckets of rice, that was going on in 2000, according to this guy from Playboy magazine. Again, TV is TV, but you're right. If you look at the learning context of that show, it's, I'm going to screw you so I can win. That is where everyone dies in a real survival situation. Yeah. We haven't really talked about teamwork. I'm sure you're the king of teamwork. I can imagine that SEAL teams are the apex in teamwork because you're literally depending on your team at times for survival. Tribes were too. If you look back at whatever your heritage is, your people were tribal, just like mine back in the day, and everyone mattered, right? The weakest link is going to screw us all. So we want us to all succeed. And it's not everyone's a winner. No, it's not some politically, it's survival. We need to all be on the same page. We need to all do this to get it done. And so, that I don't even consider that a survival show. It's so devolved. Yeah. It's an interesting probably show on the psychology of sociopaths and screwing other people for money, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, as successful as it's been, I think it's been a detriment to the industry and to kind of the principles behind, surviving that way. I mean, it's to me,
I'll go a step further. In my opinion, and I've thought about this a lot, and I think probably the worst thing that's happened, and I know that survival TV shows have turned on a lot of people to real trainers. I've had them as students myself. But overall, if you were to pull back and look at it from a bird's eye view, I think the worst thing that's happened to the industry of survival training are survival TV shows. They're wildly dangerous. They're wildly out of context. They're featuring people who are not real survival experts that then might start their own school and start buying their own BS. It's really, really done a bad thing for the industry that I'm not sure will ever be repaired.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I mean, even not being a survival expert, I can see that writing on the wall with the misrepresentations. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a survival expert by any stretch, but I have been in enough environments enough times to be able to see when somebody knows what the fuck they're talking about versus not, for sure. And it seems like overwhelmingly most of them don't. I'm going to throw a hypothetical at you that may be a shot across the bow, boilerplate, dumb question for you. Maybe not. We'll see. But so hypothetically, and I know it's going to depend wildly on the environment, but let's say the challenge is we're going to drop you in an environment and you don't get to know what it is. You don't get to know if it's, water heavy or, super hot, super cold, humid versus dry, what have you. But there's a backpack that you can bring with you. And let's say it's a standard size, backpack that you would have at a college campus, a book bag size backpack. What are you going to put in that backpack?
I warned you. You've asked me. I'll ask you one.
All right.
You're going on a life-threatening mission.
Yeah.
You don't know who you're going to be with. I'm not going to tell you who the enemy is or what part of the world. We're just going to, whatever they call it, we're going to drop you at night.
See, I can answer that question.
Okay, so answer my question.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to have, in terms of gear, it's going to be all black, right? Is because it's going to be at night, or I'm going to choose for it to be at night. So everything's going to be all black. I'm going to have a medium range long gun, say probably a 300 blackout. And I'm going to have my standard secondary pistol. I'll have, I'd say 5 or 6 magazines for the primary, 1 in the secondary, and 2 spares. I'll have a basic medical kit, a basic E&E kit, our standard loadout communication device wise, enough rations for a few days worth of food, a GPS, a flare setup, a strobe, an IR strobe. In terms of loadout with explosives, probably at least 2 small breaching charges, 3 or 4 small Swedish hand grenades, and a really shitty attitude. That's everything I'm going to put in there. But, because that's going to be my most cookie cutter. Like, is it going to be exactly what I would take for environment X or environment Y? No, but that's the most generic, general purpose loadout I could take. That's going to blanket cover as many scenarios as possible.
Okay. Touche.
Yeah.
You answered me. Go ahead, and then I'll answer you.
I was just going to say, it's a little bit apples to oranges. It's easier for me to answer that because it's a very specific mission that I know we're going to be on. Like, everything is going to be pretty assault oriented. So you're going to have kind of the same basic gear. Now, whether we do that in an arid desert environment versus a jungle environment, like, our loadout isn't going to change a ton. There's going to be tweaks here and there to it. Maybe the camo pattern is different, or, if it's super arid, I'm going to be carrying more water than I would if I'm going to the jungle. But, by and large, it's easier to say, here's our assault loadout. And there's going to be more nuance, environmentally, but.
Okay. Well, that's impressive. And, I'll do the same. Okay. This is very generic, right? Yeah. So I don't know where I'm going, and I have a book bag essentially, right? What's in the book bag? God. Part of the reason I like primitive living skills is it helps define what's a need, not a want. Being out in the bush, or frankly, being in town. So it's nice to know primitive skills, but it can help define what you'd carry for modern gear. When you find out how important this has been for several 100,000 years, it's probably important now. So like we talked earlier, I'm going to have some cutting edge, right? And I'm going to leave it at that. I would like to have some way to create fire. Ideally, your shelter, your first primary shelter always is your clothing, regardless of my lack of clothing. And partly the reason I wear less clothing is to acclimate to the environment, but I don't know where you're going to throw me. So I'd want adequate clothing for whatever the environment would be, the cutting edge, the way to make fire, and ideally, some sort of container, and probably I'm assuming I would have to disinfect my water within that container. And then maybe some sort of shelter. The archival shelter would be a tarp, right? And I don't know what I'm doing if I'm trying to live off the land like those Philippine guys, or, because of course we would like, food. But the thing about survival training is most people that go to a survival training camp or whatever, that's what we call camping in Arizona.
Yeah.
You don't have all your kit. in a survival situation. It's the absence of the kit potential that makes it a survival situation. So if you train with all the gadgets in your survival kit and my MREs and whatever, that's not survival training. That's fucking camping, dude.
Yeah.
So if you want to survival train, you train down dirty. You know, you train how to use the tool, but then you train when you don't have the tool, because that's probably why you're in the survival situation in the first place. Yeah. So I would go with those basics. And if you think about Indigenous people, if you're an Inuit or a Kalahari Bushman, you'd have that cutting edge. You'd have that way to make fire. You'd want shelter from the environment, primarily thermoregulation via your clothes, and then maybe with exterior, like the tarp we talked about. You've already given me the backpack, so that's one container I can use. And some sort of containment method, probably steel, so I could disinfect maybe the water, or I could put it over my fire and boil it. And I'm going to leave it there, because I don't like generic questions, because they can confuse people. But those are some of the big things that I'm sure you guys had in your E&E kit, and that a lot of Native peoples would have had in their E&E kit, and what I'd recommend general purpose for whatever bioregion you're finding yourself on planet Earth. Yeah,
no, I love it. And agreed. Yeah. I mean, I just, I like the hypothetical, because I'm just curious about it, I guess. But what are the two key components for canine success? That's effective training and proper nutrition. Fueled by Team Dog brings those two components to your family and best friend. The perfect nutritional balance that results in a higher mental acuity, energy, overall vitality, and even an improved appearance. Every product you will find in my company's store was born from the battlefield and not from the boardroom. Let my life's work help you become your dog's hero. All right, so I'm gonna push the envelope with another potential boilerplate question here, just for shits and giggles. Is there a style of knife that you tend to carry more frequently, say a kukri or what have you? Like if you put it in...
Well, that's a good question, because you've premised it with style, which allows me to provide the context. Yeah, I like Scandinavian knives, and it's not just because of my Viking ancestors. Again, Moors, I mentioned that my mentor in Canada turned me on to that style of knife. And this is kind of coming from his mouth, but I've proven it over the last 30 plus years. It's what I like in a general bush knife too. Mm-hmm. I like a knife where the handle's oval. I don't like sharp corners. These calluses are from lifting, right? And doing something called manual labor. But if you do a lot of knife work like I do, if you have a square edged handle, you're going to pay for it, because it's going to rip up your hands. Yeah. So I like an oval, comfortable handle. I like a handle that fits in my palm. Okay. So I like a blade. I like carbon steel. We can talk about that later. And I like the Scandinavian knives, whether it's a Finnish puukko or whatever, that has the literal, real wide bevel for sharpening. You could be Stevie Wonder and sharpen this knife, right? There is no 3 millimeter Lansky that I have to. No, you can just put this knife down and tactily feel it lock into the sharpening board, which I make myself. I make my own boards, and you can sharpen this blade. That blade is about as long as the handle is, so they're pretty much equal. And the cutting edge, and this is important because it equates with power and leverage, I like where the blade comes right out of the handle. And a lot of people have these pommels or these, we've made an inch where it's dull for some reason, and then the blade starts. When you're cutting anything, especially in backcountry, the further you have that stick out toward the tip of the blade, the more power and leverage you lose. Yeah. So I maximize most of my knife work. 90% of it is done on that 1 inch of blade right coming out of the handle. So I don't like pommels, weird ass guards or anything. I want the power coming right out of my hand. So I have that oval handle that comfortably fits in my hand. It's not overly long, not overly short. I have the carbon steel blade with a wide bevel on it so I can sharpen it. I don't like saw blades. I don't like any bullshit on my blade. And we'll get into that later. Carbon steel, because I can strike a spark on the back to make a flint and steel fire, and it's easier for me to sharpen on my sharpening kits. And this isn't my idea. This is Moore's, and this is for your listeners. He gets an old hardcover book from the thrift store. He was a real book nut. He was a scholar. or that fake paneling, the cheap paneling on the Brady Bunch trailer, cuts that down to the width of wet and dry sandpaper. And it's about maybe this thick or so. So you can just go down the sheet of sandpaper. And for his field sharpening board, he'll cut out a piece of plywood paneling, and he'll put double-sided carpet tape on it. And he'll put 400 grit wet dry sandpaper on one side and 600 on the other, push them down on the tape. And that's all I've used. No shit, for more than 30 years. Oh. It will not work on stainless steel because the metal's too hard. We don't like stainless steel. I don't like stainless steel. One, because I'm not in Hawaii. I'm not worried about rust or whatever. I like the spark off the bat because I can make fire with my knife, and I can sharpen it easily and maintain that blade. The point kind of lines up with the back of the knife. I do like a full tang knife, although the Moras tend to be rat tang, where the knife's not the literal width of the handle, but it's better than nothing. I do not like folders. I like, again, a full tang blade, and that's pretty much what I'm looking in a knife. Now, there's some Scandi knives. When I was training in Norway, we had a Sami person help us on set. The Samis are the original native people. They got pushed into the real shitty areas of Finland and Scandinavia by my people. He told me you Vikings actually pushed us out to the more marginal regions because you took all of our good farmland. I was like, sorry, dude, I had no idea. He gave me as a gift the blade was like that long, and I forget what they called it, but it was like a small machete. And they said in combat in World War II, they used to just cut the heads off the German soldiers, fucking cut their head right off with this blade.
Is it a Scramacix?
I don't know, but it was it looked like a Morris Scandi knife because it was Scandinavian, but whoa, it was a whopper blade. And they cut everything and did everything with that blade. Yeah. So that's what I like in a blade. And I've proven that over time. It's not my idea. I picked it up from Moores, but I can tell you this. Most people that make knives don't use their product, period, because they suck. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of beautiful, fancy artwork style knives that aren't worth a shit to actually use out there. I mean, it seems like that's the more popular, famous, famous pieces out there now. But is my assumption that you're not a fan of the saw or serration from a sharpening standpoint?
What do you mean by that?
Do you not like serrated blades or the saw style blade because it's impossible to sharpen simply?
I just don't like serrated blades for my context, for what I do. I'm not cutting French bread. Yeah. I understand serrated blades in your application, maybe on rubber dinghies and cutting webbing and certain things like that. So I'm not poo-pooing serrated knives. I'm poo-pooing them for what I do for a living. Okay. So the challenge to sharpen is pretty evident. And there's just when I'm dealing with a knife in the backcountry, most of what I'm doing is 45-degree angle cuts. Yeah. I'm pushing down and I tend to carve with my torso. I'll isosceles off standing, if I'm standing, hold my knife almost at full arm's length. In case I slip, there's only a few inches of travel. And I'm powering through with the strength of my upper body. And we're cutting in 45-degree cuts. We're not doing this like you're cutting French bread. Yeah. That's the inherent nature of a serrated blade, is to do this. So most bushcraft, you're just pushing and cutting. And that's another reason I like that real wide bevel on Scandinavian knives, because it bites into wood and stuff real well, you know? So I'll tell you one quick story without the person behind it, because I don't want to get a slander case on my ass, but you'll like it because they were special forces. Yeah. There's a person I know that designed a knife, and every bit of the knife around the perimeter had something different to it for a specialized use. And that was supposed to be the sell point of this knife. With that person, by the way, this person could not sharpen the knife that they made. So they had to have the maker send them a new knife every time they used it, because they didn't know how to sharpen the knife that they designed. First red flag, right? Yeah. What that person fails to understand is a generic knife, a knife that's simplistic in design. It's the user's responsibility to add intent to that knife blade. If you have a specialized blade, the specialization is it's not a benefit, because it narrows you into that specialization. So what I like about simple Scandinavian blades is I can skin an elephant, or I can pick my toenails, or I can do whatever I want. It's the user's skill that goes into a generic knife design that does the work. It's not a specialized blade that then inhibits what I can do with that blade.
So a less is more in essence when it comes to knives? It's
a more is more. It's really like I can do more with a simple blade. Now, we're not on some SEAL mission where JSOC, or however you pronounce this, designs some special thing because we need to puncture someone's tire. This is a general purpose bush knife, and that's the context of which I'm approaching you. The simple blade with the simple bevel, with the simple handle, with the carbon steel simplicity will pay off in the most circumstances with the variables we've talked about in the backcountry, hands down.
Yeah. I mean, so similarly to the survival industry and how TV shows have corrupted the societal mainstream idea of what it is, pop culture has done the same thing with special operations. You know, like for us carrying blades, it's I would say almost exclusively from a utility standpoint. It's for cutting line, for, you know, basic shit that you would carry a normal fucking pocket knife for. I mean, if we find, and it's the same thing with a lot of hand-to-hand stuff that I think is a misconception. Yes, we do training in certain, you know, combatives, jujitsu and striking and prisoner handling and things like that. However, that isn't our main focus as it relates to training. You know, shooting, moving, communicating, assaulting targets is our bread and butter. So if we're at a point where we're going hands-on with somebody or having to throw a knife or knife fight somebody, things have gone so fucking horribly wrong at that point, you know, to where it doesn't matter if you're good at it or not, because you're so fucked anyway, you know, that you've wasted your time, you know, practicing to the level that you would need to practice those skills to be competent enough at them to apply them in a combat scenario. It's just cost prohibitive, you know. But so, you know, a lot of times people think like everybody is a fucking black belt wizard and a Steven Seagal knife throwing wizard and this, you know, Jedi warrior with all these obscure different types of weapons. And while yes, we use some of those in certain capacities, overwhelmingly, you know, shooting, you know, and moving and communicating with big groups of people through targets is overwhelmingly what we practice and what we're good at. But one of the things I was curious of, you know, outside the blade stuff is that I can only imagine that, you know, companies probably solicit you nonstop to endorse their products or try it or recommend it or whatever. Do you do any of that, or is there a kind of a product list that you have that you kind of endorse or sign off on or recommend in certain applications, or do you stay away from it?
Interesting you ask me. I've never endorsed anyone for anything.
Yeah.
And part of that is because the people that were approaching me for endorsements, I didn't want to.
Yeah.
Because I know people, and you know people, who've endorsed whatever's not nailed down.
Oh, yeah.
That's called a slut, right? That's not a... You know, if I endorse something, and I probably can be bought, right? We could all be bought for a certain price.
Sure.
But I have literally dual survival, all this stuff. I've never endorsed a product. Yes, I've been hit on many times to endorse a product. It doesn't mean I won't endorse a product. But regarding knives, I didn't work with a company or was approached by a company. I'm pretty serious about my stuff. I'm very serious about my professional reputation. It's all I have. Yeah. It's all you have, right? Yeah. If you compromise your professional reputation as a dog trainer, one, you're fucked. Financially, eventually you're screwed. But as I can imagine, you have probably a certain oath of honor to integrity to your craft, I would imagine, as a SEAL. I have mine big time. And that's part of the reason I butted heads with certain executives is I'm not going to compromise my craft. I'm not going to compromise my credibility, and I'm going to do what I think's right to save as many people as possible. And that doesn't mean endorsing bullshit.
So is the following scenario potentially something that you came across where it's, hey, company X is willing to spend a fuck ton of money, if we plug their product and you look at it and say, yeah, it's a piece of shit, I would never use that or endorse it. And then that's when you have a problem with them.
Well, I might not be quite that blunt, but I'll give you a perfect example. And very few people, I've never mentioned this, let alone on a podcast. Early season 1, dual survival. Discovery Channel brings me in, and unfortunately Dave, and has this shitty little table of gear, camping gear, we'll call it, that's very poorly made. It's crap. Okay. Mm-hmm. And kind of were asking me, and what about this and what about this? And that was the first in-house endorsement. And I just looked at it and said, this stuff is garbage. You're trying to do this made in China stuff, slap my name on it or whatever show's name on it. I'm not doing it. And here's why. And that was the earliest time that I've been approached a lot before dual survival, but you have to have a pretty damn good product or me to sell out for me to endorse that, or to the pretty good product. Like I'll wholeheartedly endorse my instructors. In other words, the people that taught me the Moorses, the Dave Ganseys and stuff like that. And I've screwed myself, man. I've lost a lot of money over not endorsing stuff. I'm not, and you might say, I just can't do it, and maybe there'll be a time in my life when I can do it, but I will be graceful and I'll just try to back out. I'm not interested in hurting someone's feelings or shitting on someone, but I don't want to put my name on something that I don't believe in. Yeah. And maybe that'll change. I hope my integrity holds intact. But if you look at some of the people I've worked with and all the stuff that's been endorsed and gone down, there's a line of it's all about this. And I understand, I'm a businessman too. Again, as a professional survival instructor, as a Navy SEAL, as a very specific guard dog trainer, your integrity and your credibility and your professionalism and your dedication and your sacred honor to your client is everything. And that should not be breached. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, to me, the way I navigated and what makes sense to me is a very simple question that I ask myself with any product. There's products I endorse, there's products that I don't. Is that, is it something I either use or will/would use? Then yeah, I'm happy to say, this is a great product. I've used it before and I would recommend it for situation X. If it's not, then I won't, and it's really that simple. And the line of products that I've developed over the years is honestly, it's in result to not having what I wanted being out there. There's, I have dog food, treats, supplements, a collar and leash, a crate, that were all, basically collaboratively designed between me and a manufacturer to get it exactly how I wanted it because there wasn't another product out there. And so now it exists because that's what I wanted and I also sell it. But then there's also, I don't make remote collars, but there's a couple brands that I use and endorse. They don't pay me to do it. I just, if somebody says, hey, what remote collar would you recommend? And I say, well, here's the two brands that I use. So that's how I manage it. Some of them are actual endorsements. Some of them aren't. It just, again, to me, it's really irrespective of the financial component. It's, do I use this? Yes. This is what I use. Do I use this? No, I don't. And I'm not going to say, hey, there's this product, no matter how much fucking money somebody offers, if it's not something that I would actually use, Right.
But another thing that your listeners should know is the tagline for my survival school is the more you know, the less you need.
Yeah.
I'm not a gear slut. I know them and I appreciate good gear. But to me, my product is extreme teaching. Yeah. My product is making you more confident. My product is showing you what you don't need. My product is showing you what you do need. My product is having you do more with less in a wilderness landscape. A high apex of skill is to go out there and get the job done with limited gear. I pride myself on that. And I'm not opposed to gear. I love good gear. But it's problematic for me to develop product when I won't say I'm a minimalist, but I'm really into doing more with less because that requires a higher apex of skill. And I just think it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah. No, I completely understand and respect that, is that, especially based off of, one of the statements you made earlier of when people find themselves in the positions of survival, it's because they don't have all the Gucci gear and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it seems counterintuitive to have a bunch of products with your name on it that if you forget them, then it doesn't fucking matter how cool or good they are anyway. I am curious. I know you said, discovery was the shittiest spot you found you're in, but has there been a moment that stands out in your mind where, from a survival standpoint, where you were the closest to perishing that kind of stands out?
I was a little kid in Europe, like I mentioned, and grade school. I forget which grade. And it was during the Christmas season, I remember, and my parents took me to Austria to ski. We were big into downhill skiing. If you've been to some Austrian ski resorts, they are massive. And I skied alone because, they let me have apparently a little bit too much free latitude on this particular trip.
How old were you?
Grades, probably 7, 8 years old. And I'm skiing, and it's not backcountry, it's a ski resort. But when it was starting to get dusk, I thought, and there was a sign literally on the ski resorts that said Germany, because you could ski into the next fucking country, And in my 8-year-old brain or whatever, it's like, I need to ski to Germany because that's where I live. And so I skied in the wrong place. And then it got dark. And then the ski resort was closed. And keep in mind, if you're skiing, it's a winter survival situation right off the bat, right? And I'm a little kid. Little kids and elderly people are very responsive to hypothermia because in my case, I had less body mass because I'm a kid, right? I'm not dressed for this epic adventure. I found my way to a Gasthaus, which is it was a little house there that had a little restaurant, and very scared. And I was crying at this time. And I remember beating on the door because it was totally pitch black. No one's there. And I found this house by skiing back that was literally where you could buy tea during the day. And I was beating on the door crying. And this old German woman, was ist das? What is that? And she looked out and made these guys take me in and got me hot soup and got me in a snowcat back to the parking lot where my mom was super pissed at my dad, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And they brought me back to civilization. Now, picture yourself being an 8-year-old boy in a foreign country in the mountains in the wintertime with no clue with what's going on, and you skied into the wrong country.
Yeah.
Early on, that was a situation that could have turned very bad for me. And needless to say, I didn't have any skill set back then other than eating chocolates for Christmas or whatever. That's probably the first time.
Is that something that, that memory, has that ever popped into your head in some of the cold environments as an adult?
Not in the cold environments, but just in the gratitude environment, like being real thankful for that lady, being real thankful she was there. I'll never forget her.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really cool story. So what courses do you teach now and how often?
Sure. Like I mentioned earlier, I teach modern outdoor survival skills, which is dealing with modern fire, search and rescue. It's, again, the Jeep breaking down. What do you do? I teach primitive living skills, Stone Age technology, making fire with sticks, and urban preparedness. A lot of my courses are 2 days, so it's just a weekend. It's fairly easy. I have 2 main types of courses, skills courses, where the client comes in, they can have their sleeping bag, no tents, their sleeping pad, they can bring their food, water bottles. We're essentially camping with no tents and learning the content. And this is important. We're learning content. And then I have contextual courses that kick your ass, that we're out there with limited gear, limited water, limited food, and we're moving through landscape, and the course is in context. It's not just you're learning the content, but in the context of a threatening environment or threatening scenario. And they're very, very different.
Because one, you're actually having to rely on that skill set.
It's one thing to learn how to make a bow drill set, fire with sticks, where you're having your bologna sandwich and you're going to crawl into your sleeping bag and yuck it up with your co-students. It's another thing to learn how to make that bow drill set when you're grouchy, you slept under a tree with no gear, you're dehydrated, and you don't have any food. And the apex of skill, not that you'll remember it because of your state of mind, is learning the bow drill in that stress environment. That's a contextual course. That's a contextual skill, not a content skill. Yeah. So I do both of those courses from 2 days to I have a 4-day urban preparedness to 7-day courses in survival. This is our 31st year at the Aboriginal Living Skills School. I teach winter survival, desert survival, because Arizona, I'm blessed. We have more geographical diversity in the shortest drive time of any place in North America. California has more, but it's a longer drive time. So I can literally do winter survival and desert survival and have with news crews literally back-to-back days because of the diversity we have here.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Are the context-driven ass kickers the 7 to 10 day courses?
7 to 9 day. Yeah, the longer courses. I don't probably need to tell you this, but you can induce stress in a variety of ways. Yeah, you can induce stress by taking gear. That could be sleeping gear. That could be food. That could be water. You can induce stress by movement or non-movement. You can induce stress by putting them out when you know it's going to be this hot. You can induce stress by putting them out when you know it's going to be this cold. Or you can induce stress by the length of the course. So the more ass-kicking courses tend to be longer. Correct.
Yeah. Have you ever had instances where during the ass-kicking courses or even the other ones where students of yours become problems where they're like, no, you're not fucking like they start getting attitude and it becomes an issue?
I run a pretty tight ship and I'm alpha. I'm responsible for my kids and I'm alpha right off the bat. And I make it clear, not in these words. I'm a nice guy until I shouldn't be nice, but I'm the boss here. I'm in charge of your safety. I care about you. I'm your leader, which means I take the hit, not you. That's what leadership's about. But I need you to do what I fucking say. Yeah. If there's something going down in the field, we're gonna move on my mark. And everyone's just kind of because it's important. I'm sure you've heard and lived by the term command presence.
Oh yeah,
it's not being everything. A dick. It's not being a bully. It's just I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm talking about, and I need you as my students. But what I try to do, which I think is important, is over the length of the course, I want them to self-lead. And I tell them, I'm going to start backing off as the days go by because I don't want you Cody dependent. I want you self-reliant. I want you tribal driven. So I start to back off. And it's fun talking to you because I know that you know this with your SEAL teams. There's the person that talks too much. There's the person they present stronger. They're not a bully. They're just out. There's the person that knows, but is kind of more reserved by personality. So here's where the psychology comes in again. I have to look at the pecking order and I'm trying to have an altruistic tribe. And that picture, I'm going to say that one more time. An altruistic tribe. Now, that's kind of what a tribe is. But when you're dealing with human egos, and I've seen it in women too, especially in men, having a fluid tribe move in backcountry with limited gear that's respectful, that's driven not by any alpha personality, but by a commonality for group good is a fucking art form to be able to pull that off. And when I have a tribe that does that cares about each other, that moves through that backcountry, that starts to automatically download these skills and how they move, how they breathe, how they talk, when to get up, when not, what to say, it's beautiful. And I know you know that in a warfare sense.
Yeah, well, even in, I would say, two ways. The more obvious one being, in a SEAL team, whether you're, a swim pair, a fire team, a squad, a platoon, a task element, whatever the size group is, the bigger, the more impressive, I think. But from a standpoint of similarly, if at night on night vision, without saying really anything, you've got 16 guys that are flooding a house, and there's 7 or 8 or 10 or however many bad guys in there, or whatever the fuck it is that's going on. And you have the ability to sweep through there without saying anything. You know exactly what every other guy is going to do before he does it. You can anticipate everything, and everything is orchestrated to where it's like a masterful orchestra, performing. I mean, it's something to behold, and it's incredibly humbling and special to be a part of that when you are, as I'm sure it is for you to witness, your students doing that.
Yeah. It's art. It's a high art, isn't it?
It for sure is. And I would say that command presence and even more so, when you're firing on all cylinders with a dog at a high level of training, similarly, is that when you have, because that command presence, one thing that I think a lot of people don't think about until you verbalize it. And I said it earlier, but I'll say it again, is that dogs don't think in a language, right? And so if they don't think in a language, they don't communicate in a language either, obviously. And so while, yes, there are verbal communications from dog to human and dog to dog, et cetera, overwhelmingly it's nonverbal communication and body language that is dogs' communication with each other and with us as human beings. And so your command presence, and I think you nailed it. It's not about being a dick. It's about exuding an emotional stoicness that a dog can pick up on fucking right now. Like, that guy knows what the fuck he's doing.
Exactly.
And I trust him. He's not being an asshole, but he's for fuck sure not a pushover either. And so once you get in a very tight bonded, trust-based relationship with a dog, and you're doing things that aren't just, parlor tricks and fucking obedience. I'm talking about, sending dogs in, doing advanced, using laser guided for explosive detection, or, jumping through a fucking window of a warehouse to go get a bad guy that's fighting him with something or what have you, and being able to move into those environments. And that dog knows exactly what you're going to do, and you know exactly what that dog's going to do. And you're kind of feeding off each other non-verbally. It's really fucking cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it really, and I frankly think a lot of similarities exist between that and what you do in terms of the primal nature, is that, man and dog have been working together for a long fucking time, and while.
Do you know how long? Have you done any historical research on that at all?
I mean, I have, but it's so all over the map. I mean, I would say that, there's, different lengths of time. The most common one that I've come across is 10,000 years. Now, Who fucking knows if that's how long it is or not,
For war dogs? What about for war dogs?
Well, for war dogs, I mean, since recorded combat experience, dogs have been used in combat from the beginning. And that's one thing I mentioned in my first book. It's in the very beginning, is that what captivates me and I find truly remarkable is that from the beginning of recorded combat, is that there's one thing that human beings have consistently used at the very highest level of combat, and that's dogs. And even in today's day and age, where there's laser guided munitions and night vision and smart bombs and drones that can detect heat and fire munitions that go through 8 feet of reinforced concrete and all this other whiz bang shit. Our nation's most elite forces, our tier 1 special operations units, have canines out in front of them leading in combat scenarios.
Wow.
And to me, like, if that's not, a telling and accurate representation of how remarkable and effective canines are, nothing is, because, special operations groups don't use shit that doesn't work. While some industries use a lot of shit that doesn't work, if it's being used in combat, it's absolutely for a fucking reason. And,
right.
It's really neat to see them, still being utilized and still being as effective.
Can I ask you a dog question?
No, please do.
Why Malamute, Belgian Malamute? I mean, why?
Malinois, yeah.
How do you pronounce that?
Malinois.
Okay. What makes a good combat dog, and were they bred to be good combat? I see that we know the Doberman Pinscher, German Shepherd. That's more like probably A-team stuff on TV. Yeah. But what makes a good combat dog, and why?
So a lot of the same similarities from a character trait and working drive standpoint that make a human a good operator, in terms of, environmentally stable, confident, socially competent, and sociable enough to be able to be integrated into units that there's moving parts and people that maybe the dog doesn't know very well. Being athletic, being well-rounded physically. So that's the first part. I could spend hours talking about the nuances of, prey drive and hunt drive and natural forward aggression and things of that nature, which are all very important, but, take a fair bit of explanation that probably is beyond the scope of this episode. But I will say from a, kind of a long-term standpoint or generational standpoint of what makes the Malinois such a good dog is the utilitarian well-roundedness of them. 150 years ago, they were primarily herders. They were sheep herding dogs, but farm dogs, and not dissimilar to even today, is that what makes a good farm dog is, just like I said, it's well-rounded, is that you can hunt with it. You can use it for protection. You can use it for companionship. You can use it for vermin and ratting and keeping, quote unquote, the riffraff out. That there's kind of a multi-purpose application to them where they're good at everything. They may not be the very best at any one thing, but they're good at fucking everything. And so, especially in an environment where, special operations are kind of the jack of all trades, master of none to a certain extent. That dog has to mirror that same capability in terms of being able to do all of these things in really any environment, because we do take them in pretty much any environment, including jumping out of planes, that we go in, with the exception of underwater. Nobody's invented a scuba rig for a dog just yet, but maybe that'll come down the pipe. Who knows?
How long have you guys been using that breed in particular?
Not that long. So, it was, well, let me take a step back, is that, that breed has just been something of kind of a bastard child as far as being well known. It's been around as long as German Shepherds and anything else has. I mean, I'd say 80 years, 100 years ago, the German Shepherd, the Belgian Malinois, and the Dutch Shepherd were essentially all the same dog. It was really a paint job at that point. And from my standpoint, it really still is, in that my selection test is what it is. It takes no bias or account for sex, for breed, for markings, for any of that. I don't give a shit what it is. It could be a fucking golden doodle. If it has all of the traits that I need to do that type of work, then that dog passes my selection test, and it's in the program. If it doesn't, on the transverse, it also doesn't matter. I don't care if its parents were the best two dogs I've ever come across, and it's the most, benchmark consummate example of the most picturesque working Malinois I've ever seen. If it doesn't do what it needs to do in the capacity with which I need it to, then it doesn't fucking matter either. And so, I wouldn't say that we necessarily have preferences for those three breeds or even the specific breed of a Malinois. It's just that because it's been a very heavily selectively bred dog for a long time, and the stewards of the breed, by and large, have been very masterful in how selective they've been, in such a good way that it's maintained a really high working standard for that breed at a higher percentage level than other breeds. I've seen, dogs of just about every breed that had similar character traits, but they're anomalies. Whereas with these dogs, there's just a much higher percentage of candidates that, that are at that level, where and when they need to be. But,
and I have one, can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
I was on your website for the dog rehab, and I saw the pictures of the dogs, but I didn't understand, are you taking combat dogs and trying to replace them with civilian individuals, or would those dogs try to be replaced with someone who's military for non-combat reasons?
It's both. I mean, the short answer is whatever makes the most sense for that dog in that scenario. We've had thousands of volunteers that have said, hey, I'd love to take one of these dogs. In most cases, their situation is not a good fit for the dogs that we have. It is important to keep in mind for anybody listening that maybe wants to volunteer, and I do encourage it. On the same token, is that every one of the dogs that we get in for a very specific reason, and it's not because they're easy to deal with, or would make a good foster candidate. None of them are, and that's why we have them, is that in every instance, these dogs have come to us with the very basic premise that they bit several people that they weren't supposed to. and ultimately got themselves in the position, whether it's temperament, whether it's training baggage, whether it's PTSD from certain operational tempos in different environments. Maybe it's a combination of all those things. But the reality of it is that they are in a position where whatever unit they're with has deemed them dangerous to the point where they're such a liability that they would rather euthanize the dog than continue having them. Wow. So that's the backdrop with which we're getting every single one of these dogs. Every one of them that we have, and we have a kennel of 30 of them at any given time, and usually have a few on a waiting list to come here, is that every one of those dogs would have been euthanized by that unit if we didn't take them. That comes with a huge amount of responsibility. And every employee that I've had, basically, it's kind of like a firefighter. It's not when you're going to get burnt. It's just, or it's not if, it's when. Wow. It's a dangerous, line of work. And I've been bit a number of times. Like I said, everybody that I've had working for me over the last 12 years, has as well. And so, it's just kind of part of the deal. But, so back to your question is that, our ultimate goal, as a primary function is to act as a resource for these units so that the dogs aren't euthanized. And that's step one. Step two is then once we get the dog in is that we want to evaluate them in conjunction with the turnover data from whatever unit and handler they come from, coupled with our team's kind of assessment of where that dog is and kind of evaluating over a period of time as they settle in. Then we kind of develop a training plan, a rehabilitation protocol for each dog individually. They all have similar traits, but they all are different enough to where they require their own kind of special nuance that way. So at that point, we do what we can with the dog over a period of time. There is no time limit. It's as long as it takes. And for some dogs, we can rehabilitate them and we get them to the point where we can rehome them to either a civilian environment or a former handler or some sort of dynamic that is an appropriate fit for that dog. And in some cases we can't. In the cases that we can't, it's still a no-kill resource where we just, basically let them be a dog, and kind of, as the horse term would be, let them out to pasture and just let them retire, on the ranch and let them do their thing. And that's the gist of it, and so, in some cases we'll have the dogs for years. Until they get to the point where it's time for them to pass naturally. But
I really admire what you do with that.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's an honor to be a part of it for sure. I mean, it's a labor of love, and it's difficult. It's not a normal boarding facility that you've got $8 an hour employees that are teenage kids that are just letting chihuahuas out and having play dates and stuff. I mean, it is a very specific skill set oriented environment that's dangerous and takes a lot of effort and resources. But I've always looked at it, and that's really how it started was, not only is it worth it, it's the right thing to do. Every one of these dogs, and we've taken them in from just about every working unit, within the United States, whether it's military, police, federal, law enforcement, et cetera. And, these dogs didn't volunteer. They were bred, raised, and trained for a purpose. And the least we could do is at least give them, the dignity and grace of living out their life, to the best of our ability as humans. Yeah.
Thank you
to do that.
Thanks.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's a pleasure to be in the position to even do that. So, I'm honored to do it, but, all right. So I know we're running a little low on time here, but, if you could, if there's anything that as we wrap up that you'd like to kind of add or any services that you'd like to plug or talk about, I'd love to hear about it. Sure.
Yeah. My name is Cody Lundin. I run the Aboriginal Living Skills School based in Prescott, Arizona. We teach 2-day to 9-day courses. Our season is happening now, pretty much from April to October. And if you want to train out in the field, www.codylundin.com, CODYLUNDIN. Be careful who you train with. There's a thing on my webpage about vetting a competent instructor. I recommend that you look at it, not you, but your listeners. If you want to train and trust your life to someone, whether it's urban preparedness or whatever, vet your instructor, for God's sake. And the biggest red flag you should have, anyone on TV should be suspect. Anyone on TV, you should especially vet someone who's appeared on a survival show. vet them heavy.
Yeah. Amen. I love it. Well, thank you much. It's been awesome talking to you. Super interesting. And I'm honored. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for a number of years and really enjoyed watching the show. I know it's probably bittersweet to hear that or to think of it, but it was fun to watch, and you're a hell of a guy. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, my pleasure. For you guys, I hope you enjoyed. I know I sure did. Thank you for the continued support on the episodes. Without your support, we would not be able to do what we do. So I can't thank you guys enough. Until next time, this is Mic Drop.